Hello, hello. I'm Roman, and I am back. And today, I have something I'm particularly excited to share. So I was staring at a wall last night, thinking to myself in bed, as one does, when all of a sudden, something extraordinary happened. I had an idea. And now people have ideas all the time, but every once in a while you get one of those ideas that you feel is like a really good idea, or a really special idea. And it's not like I hadn't thought about this before, it's just, last night, some pieces clicked that I hadn't considered before, that now lead me to believe that the next Genshin Impact crossover character is going to be from The Legend of Zelda, and I think I know when they're coming as well. So stay tuned for the explanation, as well as what we're going to be getting with this hypothetical Genshin Impact x Zelda crossover. Now, to understand what I'm talking about, we kind of first need to talk about Zelda. I'm a big Zelda fan. I've been following Zelda as long as I've been playing video games. I love all the Zelda games, and Breath of the Wild is no exception. Breath of the Wild was a big deal. It came out with the release of the Switch, and it performed extremely well. It also marked a change for the series, abandoning the formula of hand-holding and linear gameplay focused around a nice story in favor of an expansive and open world, free to be explored, a bit more reminiscent of the original Zelda from 1986. But what I'm more interested in right now is when the sequel is coming, because I believe the trailer for the sequel is over 2 years old now, the original announcement trailer for the sequel to Breath of the Wild, and I started trying to pinpoint when I expect the next Zelda game to come out. Because while Breath of the Wild did release in March of 2017, it was only released during March to coincide with the Switch release date. Nintendo knew that the first new Zelda game since 2013, and the first mainline console Zelda game since 2011 would drum up a lot of hype for their new console, so it just makes sense. But if we look at the previous Zelda games and their release dates, we can start to see a clear pattern. Nintendo likes to release their big first-party games like Zelda games in the mainline series for the holiday season, meaning they're gonna release it in November, and if we look back at games like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and A Link Between Worlds, they all released in November in time for the holiday season. Not only that, but the last 4 Zelda games to come out, at least in the main timeline, were released in 2006, 2011, 2013, and 2017 respectively, giving us a maximum of about 5 years between game releases, meaning expecting a November 2022 release date for the sequel to Breath of the Wild doesn't sound outrageous at all. Therefore, for the purposes of this speculation video, we're just gonna assume that November 2022 is the projected release date that Nintendo has for the new Zelda. Okay, well, how does this relate to Genshin Impact? Well, we're not quite there yet. You see, I just want to add the fact that while people would expect a new, more powerful Switch model by this point, Nintendo just keeps insisting that they're not working on one, at least not releasing one anytime soon. So it seems pretty likely that the next Zelda game is gonna at least be playable on the original Switch hardware. That's one point of skepticism. But there's another thing. Historically, Nintendo hasn't been all that into licensing out their first-party titles, especially ever since, the Zelda CDI games. But with things like the Crypt of the Necrodancer having officially licensed Zelda DLC included in it, I'd say Nintendo's getting a little more lax with their properties. And with just how big MiHoYo has gotten over the last year only with Genshin, I'd say they have a pretty good chance. After all, the game is really similar to Breath of the Wild, so they've demonstrated that they know how to do the concept justice, at least. Also, I just wanted to mention that the Genshin Impact Switch trailer came out in January 2020. So, is it really unfair to expect the Switch version to release at any point now? It seems like they're kind of just waiting for something. But anyway, let's get off the topic of Nintendo for a little bit. Why are we talking about this? Why does the release date of the next Zelda game even matter to a Genshin Zelda crossover event? Well, let's take a look at the history of the release schedule of Genshin and just try to extend that timeline out a little bit. Keep in mind it's speculation, they could do longer or shorter updates that set all of this completely off. But if they follow the same pattern that they have been for a while, we can expect 2.4 in the beginning of January, update 2.5 in February, update 2.6 at the end of March, and then presumably 3.0 as well as Sumeru in May. Now you see, our last crossover character in Genshin was Eloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, another game that's really similar to Genshin Impact in the same ways Breath of the Wild is, and she came out in 2.1, the first update after we got our new region. So I don't think it would be outrageous to expect that 3.1 could bring us our next crossover character. Here's the kicker though. Horizon Zero Dawn released in 2017. In fact, it released before Breath of the Wild. And Aloy hasn't had another game since then, but she still got a crossover because her next game comes out in February. Let's extrapolate a bit. Let's just take a look at how long that gap is. It's about 5 months. 5 months between the release of a Genshin Impact crossover character and their next title they're even included in. You see, if the pattern continues, 3.1 will come out near the end of June, and the end of June is 5 months before November 2022. If we assume that Nintendo will even go through with the Zelda Genshin crossover, or even let their game on their console finally for that matter, then I believe it's gonna be in May or June of 2022, most likely coinciding with the update after Sumeru comes in. 3.1, I believe, is gonna have a Zelda crossover event and be playable on Switch, 5 months ahead of the release of the next game including that crossover character. The timeline just matches up too perfectly. You see where I'm going with this? It sounds so plausible to me. Maybe it's just hopium. Maybe I'm really hoping and I've blinded myself and I can no longer see clearly. But at the same time, let's just run it back again real quick. We've determined that Breath of the Wild 2 should be expected in November of 2022. Now it's possible it could be delayed to 2023, but it's almost definitely releasing in November. I think in May we're gonna get our 3.0 update, adding the new region Sumeru and the Dendro element to our main character's roster, and then on June 21st, Yoimiya's birthday by the way, we should be getting our 3.1 update with a Legend of Zelda crossover character, as well as a weapon, at least. In fact, I've kind of thought a lot about this, a Zelda Genshin crossover event. So I'm just gonna give you my wish list of what I want to see in a Genshin Zelda crossover event. What can we expect? I mean, Zelda's much bigger and has been around so much longer than Horizon Zero Dawn. I don't think there was a game in that series before 2017, and Zelda's been around since 1986. So I feel like it's safe to expect a bit more in the way of cosmetics and maybe even a crossover event, rather than just a character and a weapon. So looking at miHoYo's other game, Honkai Impact 3rd, they've actually done crossovers with Genshin as well as Evangelion, and Evangelion is huge. So I'm just gonna base my expectations of the Zelda crossover event on Honkai crossover events, which tend to include a crossover character, a crossover story, a crossover weapon, and cosmetics. So here's my wish list. In the way of minor things, I think we're gonna be getting a free green tunic skin for the main character. I don't think that would be too difficult for MiHoYo, you know? It doesn't even have to be all that cool, it just has to be green, really. And people will get the point. But far cooler than a main character skin, I think, would be an Albedo skin, where Albedo dons the champion's tunic from Breath of the Wild. I think the color scheme would match nicely, and Albedo already looks pretty reminiscent of Link. He could make a great stand-in character for the event. Now, this is a stretch, but I want nothing more in Genshin than a Bennett Tingleskin. I use him so much, and I just love to have Bennett running around in a green morph suit and a red Speedo with a balloon on his back. I think that would be hilarious. On to something more plausible? Oh yeah, the two skins that I mentioned, first of all, I don't think they're too likely. An Albedo skin seems more plausible than a Tingle skin for anyone, but I don't think they'd give that out for free. You know, it's a limited character anyway. But something I do think we could get for free is a glider. A glider based on the red Loftwing from Skyward Sword, or the Triforce, or the Master Sword and Hylian Shield. Doesn't seem like too much of a stretch. I'm sure there's gonna be some furniture, I won't even guess what exact items it would be. And something I feel is extremely likely, frankly, is a Zelda Fairy Pet. Just like the Sealies we have. I mean, we already have 4 of the 5 colors that Zelda fairies come in, I think. And we've been getting more pets over time. I feel like a pink Zelda fairy isn't too much to ask for. And lastly, the crossover character. Now, you might expect the main character of the Zelda series, Link, you know? We got Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. Why wouldn't we get the main character of Breath of the Wild if we're getting a Zelda crossover? Well, I just don't think there's as much you can do with that in Genshin. I mean, what would he be? He's so tied into green that his element would have to be Dendro or Anemo. And we already have 3 Anemo one-handed sword users. So it's entirely possible that we could be getting a Dendro Link in 3.1, but that sounds a bit far-fetched to me. Even to me. And maybe it is just bias, but I think it's much more likely we're gonna get Princess Zelda as our crossover character. Think about it. Her whole theme is blue, so she would be either another cryo character or she could be Hydro. But I think, assuming it's Breath of the Wild Zelda, there's a lot more pointing to her being a cryo character. I think that in all likelihood, if we do end up getting a Zelda Genshin crossover, we'll get a free 5-star Zelda cryo catalyst user with a free 4-star weapon, the Sheikah Slate. It just works so well. Zelda could just use the runes on the Sheikah Slate for all of her attacks. How cool would it be if she used Magnesis and Stasis with her autos to do physical damage as a catalyst user? And her elemental skill could use Cryonis and place a block on the water just like in the game, as well as encasing enemies in a block for a certain amount of time, or launching them up into the air with it. There's so much you could do. And then I think it would be really cool for her as a cryo character to have a burst like Eula's, where she does a small, low damage hit of cryo, and then a big hit of physical. So you can go in with Electro first, and then just use her ult to do even more damage than it would otherwise. And I think her burst would be a combination of all the runes. Something like Cryonis, sending the enemy up into stasis, where they're frozen midair, and then battered with bombs and metal boxes using Magnesis. It's just all coming together in my head. Anyway, I've pretty much convinced myself. But what about you? What do you think? Am I just crazy? Am I just totally on hopium? Or do you think I could be right? Please, I'd really appreciate it if you gave your opinion in the comments below. Alright, that's it. I hope you liked what you saw, enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, feel free to leave a like. Regardless, have a great rest of your day.